So, why don't you tell us, Kevin, a little bit about your congregation and where it is and how long you've been there and things like that.
Sure. Yeah. So I serve BuxMont Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, and we're one of the few UU congregations that doesn't say exactly where we are in our name. So the fellowship building is located in Warrenton, Pennsylvania, which is outside of Philadelphia. As we were saying a little bit ago, for those that just joined, I live in Doylestown, which is about a 15-minute drive from the fellowship building. And our name is BuxMont because we aim to serve as many UUs in Bucks and Montgomery counties as possible. So we've been, since our founding, a geographically dispersed congregation, and that remains true today. The
When were you all founded?
I was just about to say the congregation was founded in 1961, which is the same year as the merger between the Unitarians and the Universalists. However, we were founded explicitly as a Unitarian fellowship and remained having the Unitarian in our name until I believe it was the early 90s. It was quite a while that we kept Unitarian as our primary identifier in our names, but eventually we changed over to being a Unitarian Universalist fellowship. And in terms of just getting a sense of the community, we have about 200 adult members, about 50 kids, and about 50 friends of the fellowship. So folks that are kind of in our orbit. They may or may not be members at this moment, but they've been around for quite some time and are supporting the fellowship in a variety of ways. So I say the community serves about 200 or about 300 individuals on any given month. You know, it varies from season to season and year to year, but it's right around there.
What's the closest UU congregation to you all?
That's a good question. So we're kind of right in the middle of Bucks County, Pennsylvania. There is a lower Bucks fellowship that is lay-led, below, a little bit south of us, and Collegeville is in one direction to us. There's a Collegeville congregation, Thomas Paine, and then Washington Crossing is kind of in the other direction, and then I would say Lehigh Valley is to our north. Those are kind of the cardinal directions of the four ways. But
and Washington Crossing is in New Jersey, right? They're over the state border.
Yep. But they're kind of would be the closest, I think, going that direction. So,
and lay-led, for those who don't know, means that they don't have a minister, essentially. So the congregation itself handles all of that, preaching and committees, administration.
They have a professional director of religious education in Lower Bucks, but they do not have a regular minister, and they have a variety of lay-led services, as well as guest ministers. I've spoken there a couple of times. Sometimes intern ministers from the greater Philly area will preach there on the regular too. And then BuxMont itself, also, you might guess by its name, we have fellowship in our name. And so we come out of, in a lot of ways, the fellowship movement within Unitarianism, which means that often it was a lay-led community, and ministers sometimes were added, sometimes were not, sometimes were for a time. And BuxMont kind of represents that. Early in our history, we had a minister. Then we went for about 2 decades with it being completely lay-led. And then for the past few decades, we've slowly been building, with having settled the third or fourth settled minister in a row, depending on how you count these things, with interims in between each. And I started at BuxMont a little over 2 years ago, so this is the beginning of my 3rd year with BuxMont.
Yeah, and BuxMont itself, then, if I'm doing the math correctly, it'll be your 80th anniversary next year, right?
60th.
Oh wait, am I doing the math
60th.
wrong? I am doing the math.
Yep, 60th. Yes. So yes, next year. Yeah. So starting in January, we're going to do kind of a prelude to our 60th year this fall. But starting in January for the calendar year of 2021, we'll be celebrating our 60th year. Yes.
So you're not. It's interesting. I think often WellSprings. I think even of WellSprings as being such a young congregation, and we are. But we're going to be 14 next year. And, it's not like every other congregation is hundreds of years old. I think that's something I remember. Yeah,
and our congregation was very much developed because there were folks traveling into Germantown for their congregation or to First in Center City and not wanting to make that commute, in the 60s. And really, we were founded specifically with religious education as our primary function, similar to kind of how Lower Bucks has done it, is really focusing on the RE program first, and then the adults second in some ways. So that's why we started without a minister. It was really about having a solid religious education program for the kids that you didn't need to go on a train or have a long commute in every Sunday morning.
Right. Yeah. So you got there, you said, about 2.5 years ago, right?
Yeah, it would have been, August 1st was the beginning of my third year, this past August 1st.
So about halfway through your second year getting to know this new congregation, the pandemic hit.
Yes, yeah, it's been a roller coaster in a lot of ways, and obviously not what any of us wanted to be doing at this time. But what I found it really has done is it's really solidified my relationship with the congregation in a way that I don't think would have been as true at the same point had there not been a pandemic. Going through crisis, I think, of any kind, and this is definitely that, I think really tightens up a lot of relationships. I think a lot of the folks in our congregation have been stepping up in major ways as well, to just be here, through thick and thin, through the hard times and the good times. And this has, in some ways, been some very, very hard times. And as we'll talk about in a little bit, has also been an opportunity to really explore what it means to be a community, right? It's not the people that show up in a building on Sunday morning. We've known that, I think, in our hearts, but this has really demonstrated that. Obviously, that is the way we want to gather again as soon as safely possible, but what community means has kind of been a theme of my ministry, but I think especially since the pandemic. What does it mean to be a congregation? What does it mean to hold others in accountable, but also to hold others and make promises to them? And what does it mean when you can't do the things that you thought were the obvious things? We show up to a building on Sunday morning, we have coffee afterwards, we maybe have some meetings or some RE classes mixed in there too, and we sing together, right? All of these things that are really the cornerstone of what a lot of American religious tradition has meant for most of American history, right? That especially Protestantism, but a lot of other traditions too. You get together, often there's somebody up front saying some words. Also, we sing together, and how we do the rituals and stuff that are fit into that vary, but it's that we get together and do these things in the same room. So other congregations like Church of the Larger Fellowship and other communities have been experimenting with what that means to be online for a long time. But I think all of us have had a crash course in the past 6 months about what it means to do church and to do religion and to do community life differently.
Yeah. You used to work with Church of the Larger Fellowship before you came to BuxMont, right?
Yeah, so one of the
tell
steps,
people a little bit about what that is.
Sure. Yeah, so one of the steps in becoming a Unitarian Universalist minister is doing a congregational internship. Historically, that has meant a 9-month full-time internship with a bricks and mortar congregation. The way I did it is I studied at Meadville Lombard, and they have a distance learning model, so that allows you to move for your congregational internship if you'd like. And the way I did it is I did 2 half-time internships for 2 years. So I basically did a full-time internship for 2 years, but I split that half-time at our congregation, First Unitarian, in Brooklyn, New York, in Brooklyn Heights, and half at Church of the Larger Fellowship, which has long been our primary online religious community for Unitarian Universalists. It's evolved along with the history of communications. It started as a mail delivery service via horseback way back when, and continued on through being a part of the USPS for a very long time, being mailed letters and packages. And then as the internet evolved, Church of the Larger Fellowship evolved with it and became an online church, and has been experimenting in a whole host of ways with the internet throughout the last decade or two. They've been kind of a leading light, I think, around that for those who have been paying attention. And I was lucky enough to be at both. I was able to be in a kind of more traditional in-person congregation and be in an online congregation, and week to week be able to see the differences and similarities between the two. So it was something that I really was looking forward to bringing those skills to bear in my ministry at BuxMont, but don't think any of us signed up for being able to do it quite this quickly and quite in this way. But it's been something of being able to sort out what does it mean to be preaching to a camera? What does it mean to be having joys and sorrows shared in a chat box rather than live? You know, those sorts of things. What does ritual mean? And how do you invite people to participate along from home when traditionally it'd be so much easier just to have people come to the front and participate, or participate all in the same room? How do you do that in ways that keep people more connected than watching a screen, right? Because that's part of it, obviously. But you want, to me, religious life is always an embodied experience, even when we're not all of the bodies are in the same space.
Yeah.
So what does it mean to do that? And Church of the Larger Fellowship is one of the places that I started to learn what that looks like.
Were there any specific things that you learned in your internship with Church of Larger Fellowship that you found yourself implementing right away in March and April?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we did is we leaned very quickly into using Zoom as our primary way to do it. Not because Zoom is any better than any of the other platforms, but because one of the things that I learned through CLF was, if you're doing online worship, having the minister or the speaker or the person leading worship be this close to the camera, kind of have it feel more casual in some ways, or at least more interpersonal, rather than some of our congregations have been doing it where you're in the sanctuary and kind of doing that with some distance between the camera and the minister. And what Meg Riley, who is one of my mentors there, really stressed is the want of having it feel more conversational, just like what we're doing right now. And Zoom, as well as some other platforms, really allow that. So that's something that we're continuing to think about as we go forward here. How do we keep it feeling more connected? Because with the screens between us, it's so easy to feel really disconnected from what's going on, or have it feel that it's much more a show that's happening over there rather than a thing that we're doing here. So that's one part of it. And another part of it is trying to think about, maybe not every week, but how many ways are there that can be interactive in a real way, so that it's maybe it's a call and response piece, or maybe you're bringing in other voices. So it's, again, not just the Reverend Kevin show, which I definitely have a central piece in our worship, but we're working really hard right now to involve a lot of the musicians at BuxMont in the creation of the music, or involving a lot more voices as we can in the different pieces that are spoken, which, again, it's easier to do that when you're all in one room. Somebody comes up to the pulpit, they do their piece, then they sit down. The transitions are kind of smoother in some ways, but this way, how can we involve, like, our music director, John Hook, this year, he's still the primary lead on our hymns, and he'll sing the hymns, and our accompanist, Margaret, will play them, so it's two people involved. But what he's done now is sent those out in advance to anybody who wants to sing along with them, and he'll bring their voices in for every hymn, so it feels more like a congregational song rather than a solo from John or a solo from one person or another. So again, it's trying to bridge that divide of having it be one person up at any given time as much as is safely possible. So if we have a household of musicians, they're kind of collaborating on pieces because they're all in the same household too.
Right.
So
yeah. Your music director, it sounds like he's been learning how to edit, like getting sound files in individually from people.
Yeah. So what we're doing is trying to have 2 virtual choir pieces a month, which involves him and our accompanist kind of laying down the initial piece, sending it out in advance to those who want to sing along with the choir, and they record themselves singing to that, and then he brings them all back together again digitally through video editing and audio editing. Yeah.
We just did you all have your water communion or your in-gathering service this
We
past
did.
Yeah. So folks may not know that typically every Unitarian Universalist congregation does something that they loosely call an in-gathering service in the fall, whether it's one of my friends I was talking to yesterday, they call it a homecoming service. For many people, it's a water communion ceremony. At WellSprings, we call it Welcome Back Sunday, and so we just did Sunday as well. And our Welcome Back Sunday sermon and message, essentially, that this Sunday was a retrospective look back at the last 6 months. So we interviewed people and we shared the stories of how music is a big one for us as well. Kind of walking through what it means when people are seeing a song, they sing together. all the sensibility of that and all of the weird experience of singing all alone by yourself, the crowd, and how different that is as a way to produce you know, one of those adaptations. When you were
We're
talking
getting
about,
road noise, which I think is me.
oh
So
yeah,
I'm gonna hop inside.
okay, cool.
The
I also
challenges of
think
being outdoors.
that's fine. I also think my Wi-Fi tends to be bad. Whenever I join in with somebody live, my Wi-Fi I think has to handle a little bit more load, and
Probably
my
they're uploading it. All right. Well,
yeah,
we'll
my
see if this
sound.
is better.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'll get back to letting you talk then also, because if people can hear you better, that's better for everybody.
yeah.
Thanks, Paula and Sharon, for the heads up on that. But yeah, what was I going to say? I was going to say something. Now I
About
lost.
homecoming and water ceremonies.
Oh, Sharon says it's better. Yay. Thanks,
Good.
guys. So yeah, we were talking about some of those same changes that we've all had to make. So yeah, I guess when you look back at the first few weeks, you know, one of the things we did, that was what I was going to say, in our retrospective, we talked about just that first week and kind of how we had to make all those adjustments really quickly. What was the first few weeks of this pandemic like for you all at BuxMont?
Yeah, I think we definitely were experiencing collective trauma. I think that that's true of everybody. So there was a lot of, I think we're in somewhat of a state of shock. Like, is this kind of working through that process of, is this real? How real is it? And then what are we going to do? So we definitely went through some kind of transition periods as we got going. And the first thing we did is it was the second or third Sunday in March, whatever, I think around March 14th, 12th, something like that, whatever that Sunday was our first move away from in-person worship. A little bit, I'll say, is before that, what we were doing is we were doing Facebook Live, as we kind of had an iPad on a tripod to one side of the pulpit, and we were doing Facebook Live basically for the rest of the program year up till that point. And then when we had to go to the next step, what we did is we kind of extended that. So instead of having worship with everybody in the room, what we did is we had a skeleton crew that first week, and we actually set the camera at a center point, and we had the pulpit one direction, the piano one direction, our altar that we used for joys and sorrows another, so that we could literally just have one camera person switching to those different views,
Kind of
but
like what
still
you were
have.
talking about before, a farther away shot of the
Yes,
whole
exactly,
group.
exactly. Yeah,
Mhm.
but the tripod was kind of really close to the pulpit, so it was kind of closer in. So we basically had me, the worship associate, the accompanist, the camera person, one person to work the doors, just to, if anybody did come, we announced that it was closed, but we did have a couple of people show up. So we probably had like 8 people in our whole sanctuary or something like that, that first Sunday of trying it. And we didn't, I believe what we did that first Sunday was we stuck with Facebook Live, just because it was the platform we knew and stuff like that. So it gave us time to kind of have this middle ground of, we'll have all of the key worship leaders in the same room to help coordinate that, but we won't have the whole congregation present. And then from there, we went more and more onto Zoom. So I think the next week we tried to do both. And I think many congregations tried to do both, or tried to do many
Facebook Live
things.
and Zoom, you mean?
Yeah, we tried to
Yeah.
do Facebook Live and Zoom simultaneously. That didn't really work. I think the load just, exponentially grew in those weeks.
Was that the Sunday that everything crashed? I
I
remember
think
that one.
so. I
Yeah.
think so. It wasn't just our congregation, but many had troubles. So we at that point opted to do it solely on Zoom, just to have one place to send people. And then we posted the recording to Facebook later on Sundays from then on. And then in terms of what has happened within worship, and then I'll talk beyond worship too, is we've experimented week to week, month to month with what we do then on Zoom. We started, I think, with a lot more interspersing of pre-recorded and live. And basically where we started was all of the spoken word pieces were live and all of the music pieces were pre-recorded, just because they often had to be. We couldn't have live multiple people singing, that sort of stuff. But as we've gone, we found that the most challenging part of worship is often the transition between those two moments of going between live and and video and stuff like that, and it can often be jarring. So we've gone more and more toward having larger parts of the worship be pre-recorded videos, and then interspersing that with a couple of moments that are live. So often now our welcome is live. We have some gathering time before worship starts that's live. We might have a moment in the middle of service if there's like a ritual or something we're doing together that's live. And then we've moved our joys and sorrows to the end of the service so that those can still, we stop recording, and then we have joys and sorrows shared live in chat that I read out aloud. But that way it doesn't go out on Facebook for everybody. And that way those pieces continue to be really of the moment and of who's present with us. But the rest of it, we can kind of work on those transitions and make it have it be more of a smooth experience, so that because often people get into the worship and then the tech goes awry and all of a sudden you're pulled out of it. So to try to limit that as much as possible. Yeah. But beyond worship, what we've really done is really tried to lean into how are we maintaining connections with one another. That's really my primary goal this entire time, and for this coming church year as well, is it's really about that first. How are we taking care of one another, and how are we also just knowing that that's what matters right now. That's what builds resilient community is connecting to one another. So we've had craft time on Zoom with anybody who wants to show up, with craft being very liberally defined. It could be knitting, you could come color, you could be baking or making food, or you could just be hanging out and chatting, but it's kind of an excuse for us to hang out on Zoom for an hour or so on Thursdays and just hang out and be with one another. But again, chat about like, what are you painting, or what are you crocheting, or something like that. And that's been really good. We've also just had a lot more community circles, a lot more time just to be with one another about what it means to just be together. And there's been some regulars that have kind of settled into different programs that we've done. That's become part of their weekly calendar. They just do that now. And obviously we've been doing things like committee meetings and that sort of stuff, board meetings on Zoom as well, but really kind of trying to figure out what are the things that people need most, and what people need most varies quite a bit. If people live by themselves, there's a lot of people that are like, literally socializing on Zoom is my primary way to socialize right now. So yeah, it means a lot to me. Families, especially I think kids in school, are feeling really zoomed out, we're hearing. So we're trying to think in religious education, which I'll talk about in a little bit, about yes, having some synchronous time on Zoom, but also what can we do off Zoom that's maybe in an online platform that doesn't require everybody to have butts and seats looking at a camera at the exact same moment, because there's so much of that right now with our work, but also a lot of people schooling, whether they're fully online or hybrid, they're getting a lot more time like this, so thinking about what can we do around that. And that's something we're also going to be experimenting with this fall, with folks of all ages. Is there a way to do small group gatherings, maybe outdoors, that sort of thing, so we could get some of that socializing that we want so much, but then do the large group things online, because it's not possible for us to do in-person worship with 50 to 100. Before we left our in-person gatherings, we had more than 100 people in the same room on a Sunday morning. There's no social distancing that makes that work. But 12 people in our sanctuary, or 12 people on our property or in our parking lot, that's possible. So really trying to think about what can we do that is safe enough, because nothing is 100% safe, but we all also need time with one another. So how do we balance those very competing interests?
Yeah, we've been coping with a lot of the same pressures of people just in different places, people depending on their life circumstances, their families, like you said, whether they live alone or whether they have small children at home, or whether they were empty nesters who now have college kids back at home. I mean, there's so many different, or whether they're essential workers and they've been going out and working this whole time,
right,
with the stresses of that, which are a whole other ballgame. So people need very different things, like you said. And for some folks, another Zoom is the absolute last thing that they want.
Right.
And for other folks, that is their only way to connect, and that is their lifeline. And that feels so much more intimate to them than watching a pre-recorded video, for example. So it's it's been an interesting time to be a minister, right? I mean, I know that for us, over the last 6 months, we've done a lot of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks,
Mm-hmm.
and experimenting with things. And we've tried some things and then said, okay, you know what, this isn't working, or it's not attracting anybody, and we've just said that's okay. You know, that's part of the approach, I think, in this time, for school systems, for probably for a lot of workplaces, and certainly for spiritual communities, is to be flexible, and hopefully to get that feedback from people that says, you know, this is working, this isn't working, and everybody understanding, fortunately, I think, and trusting that people are doing their best. You know, that we're all
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out something that's totally new to us. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think the another piece that I want to speak about is
Mm-hmm.
kind of the big theme that's developed for me and my ministry, and for what we've been doing at BuxMont, and I know other congregations too, has been really leaning into the spirit of collaboration during this time in a way that many of our congregations really struggle with. You know, we don't do a lot of cross-congregational programming,
Mm-hmm.
at least in the pre-pandemic times. And what we've really been leaning into, for instance, this summer, for summer worship, we have a tradition where most of our summer services are lay-led, and or bringing in guest speakers and stuff like that. We knew early in the spring, early in the pandemic, as it was stretching on, that wouldn't be possible in the same way, or it would take so much more coordination and support than we had available in our congregational system. So what a colleague of mine and I and some other colleagues started to talk about is, how do we do summer worship in a way that allows for some time off for our staff, that had all of a sudden, our staff and key volunteers, that had all of a sudden been thrown into the deep end of the pool with all being video producers and broadcasters, and also just gave the congregation some time to rejuvenate, but also gave them something they could never have had in normal times. And that's this piece of what we did is, my congregation and 8 other congregations partnered so that over the 9 summer Sundays, one congregation took the lead and produced their version of online worship, and then shared that video with the other 8 congregations. So we basically had 8 guest speakers, or we visited on a UU road trip 8 other congregations in Missouri, Nebraska, Illinois. I'm trying to remember all of the states. It was a total of 5 different states
Yeah.
that allowed us to be able to visit and see congregations that we would never be able to just all go together on a particular Sunday morning to see it.
So can I ask how that worked? Because that's something I've
Mm-hmm.
mentioned I've mentioned to some people in our congregation that is something people have been doing. This idea of
Mm-hmm.
taking a road trip Sunday, where
Yeah.
everybody, you know, this week, WellSprings is taking a trip to Foothills UU congregation in Colorado.
Right.
What did that actually look like for all of you? Were all of those congregations also using Zoom, or were they different platforms? Like, how did you communicate that to your congregation?
Right. So the way we did it is, we didn't want to get into trying to get everybody on the same platform or at the same time, right? Because we're in different time zones. So the way we did it is, each congregation, when they were up, provided their worship video of the week into a Dropbox.
Mm-hmm.
So that way, we played it in our Zoom room each Sunday at the exact same time, the same bat channel, the same bat time for our folks, and it was the same Zoom link every week for our people. So
Okay.
our congregants didn't need to adapt as much. They showed up, and we did a live welcome saying, "This is BuxMont UU Fellowship. Here's what we stand for. And this week we are visiting this congregation." You know, and then they would go off being live, share the video, and the videos varied quite a bit. You know, there are some similarities, but the order of things was different each week. The length was different. So I think one week was like 35 or 40 minutes. One week was a little over an hour, you know, so it was whatever that congregation wanted to share of what they're doing, right? Some of them had joys and sorrows in the middle of their service. Some of them didn't do it at all. Some had a chalice lighting and an extinguishing, a moment of prayer. Some didn't. Some had 3 speakers. Some had 1. But it was really just an opportunity to see what the congregation of the week did. you know, and also getting all these different ministers and congregations flavor of what they do. So so that's how we handled it for this particular collaboration. And again, one of the ideas here was giving some time off for our key staff and volunteers too. So other than getting the video to the person who was sharing it that week and lining up the volunteers to host worship, the rest of it was all provided by that congregation. So I basically, and my congregation at BuxMont produced the service on August 30th. But the other weeks leading up to that and after were all in a Dropbox, you know, about a week out or a few days out. And then we would download it and have it be ready.
So you said there were like 8 congregations?
It was a total of 9, I think, when we were all said and done.
So like on August 30th, all of those congregations were at BuxMont, essentially.
Yeah, we're watching BuxMont's video.
Right.
Yeah, but they weren't all in our Zoom, right? So we didn't all have to come to the exact same link at the exact same time, because then if you're at 11 a.m. Central Time or 9:15 Eastern Time, it didn't matter, because you provided it however you were providing it. If you were a congregation that shared stuff via YouTube, you could share it via YouTube. If you were on Meetup or whatever various sort of, or Teams or whatever the Microsoft equivalent is, you could do it that way and provide it the way your congregants knew church happened in this time. And then the way BuxMont handled it is, again, we had the kind of live intro and gathering time, played the video, however long it went, and then we would go to live joys and sorrows for our people each week. So it still provided that time to share what was going on, and then we would have coffee hour afterwards with the people from BuxMont that showed up to that link. So there was a good balance of, here's something really different from a community we don't know very well, and then here are those folks that I know, and those folks that I want to know what's going on with so-and-so's life week to week and be able to see them, or every other week, or whatever your summer worship schedule was as a household, you'd get to see those people that you knew and loved as well at the same time.
Yeah, that's such a nice balance, and such a cool idea. And in true pandemic form, I'm thinking, like, where did you all come up with that? And was it just like you and a bunch of colleagues being like, what can we do this summer, and figuring it out?
Yeah, it was really just and that's why, like, the congregations were chosen that way. It was very much about ministers that knew each other. We didn't sit down and try to, like, figure out, can we get a different congregation from different states each week? Are we actually going on a driving trip and have a map and stuff like that? No. So there was a lot of Midwestern congregations in the mix, just because of who knew who. And that's where I'm from. So yeah, I was speaking with Kendall Gibbons at All Souls in Kansas City, and then she would talk to folks, and we have a couple of colleague groups that meet regularly that we just put out the call and said, if this interests you, sign up for a Sunday. And once the Sundays are full, they're full. And if other groups want to make their own collaborations, cool. I know on the South Shore in Massachusetts, I believe they did a series similar to this with folks that were kind of more geographically close. But one of the things that excited me about this program, and the next one I'll talk about, is that geography doesn't matter during these times in the way that it used to. You know, you can go to Kansas City one week and then go to Massachusetts the next, and hang out in Denver the following week, and you don't need to fly people somewhere to speak at the same time. So it's ecologically better, but it's also just really exciting to get, again, to take this time knowing that there's so much hardship, so many awful things about this moment, but also what can we do that wouldn't fly in our congregations in the same way, you know, in normal times. So that's part of what I really liked about the summer experiment, and how we do that going forward is something that we're talking about. But for the other piece that I want to lift up is a collaboration that similarly came about as me and a couple of colleagues started talking about what does it mean to do religious education for children and youth this fall, knowing that many of us are either going to have kids that are completely online learning during the week, or they are now homeschooling their kids. They took them out of the public school system and are fully doing homeschooling, or they're doing some sort of hybrid between the two, or any number of things, right? But knowing that for at least a majority, if not most of this program year, we're not going to have age-based classrooms on a Sunday morning with kids running around our fellowship building. So really thinking about and knowing that putting everything exactly onto a Zoom meeting also wasn't the answer for us. We knew that from the
It doesn't
spring
just
we tried
translate.
that. Yeah, we knew that from the spring we experimented, we tried, but we were kind of in real time doing things. And we know for a lot of our families, both because the pandemic was new, but also just because it didn't appeal to a lot of them, that didn't work. So what my congregation, BuxMont, the Fairhaven congregation in Massachusetts, the Kingston, Massachusetts congregation, and the Corvallis, Oregon congregation are doing, the four of us have come up with a program that we're calling AFIRE, which stands for Alliance for Inspiring Religious Education. So it's an acronym, as many good UU things are. But the idea here is, how can we pool our resources in a way too, because all of us, first starting with the ministers, but then talking with the religious education professionals and then the RE committees in each congregation, we're feeling a little overwhelmed. What does it mean to redesign a pre-K through grade 12 religious education program for this fall? So what we started the conversation over the summer months and really started divvying up the different age-based programs between the four congregations to not have to offer everything and reinvent it for each of our four congregations. So for instance, the Kingston congregation is doing a program called POP, Parents of Preschoolers. So they're doing the kind of pre-K through kindergarten age group, and that program is mostly asynchronous. It's really geared toward the parents, not the preschoolers at that age. And how do you raise preschoolers at home mostly and talk about values and create common culture in your household in an explicit way that makes sense right now? So they're doing a series of videos for the parents mostly, and support calls on Zoom for those parents. And kind of, not to go through the whole thing, but as we go further and get older with the kids, it's more and more synchronous content on Zoom. And we kind of lean towards that. But all the programs are going to have asynchronous content, which is content you can access anytime, whenever makes sense for you, on a platform called Mighty Networks, which is kind of like Facebook, but it's a lot more controlled. So it's invite only to your group on Mighty Networks. And then within that space, there aren't things like ads. There aren't things like bots. There aren't all these other things happening on Facebook
Political arguments.
Yeah, right. And it's very much an invite only to that space. So what we're doing is, for the kids, teens, parents, and the volunteer adults for that program, all of the adults in that space are going to have background check clearances, and it's invite only. So as families register from our four congregations, they get in there so we know who all's there, right? So it's a safer space online, and it's a space that we thought that, especially that kind of late elementary preteen crowd, this might be their first social media experience. So we wanted to give a space where we knew who all's there. Even if I don't know all of the adults there, the Corvallis minister and their RE staff knows, or the Fairhaven or the Kingston group, they know who's there. In a way that we don't know when we get onto Facebook. And even if you get on there and join the particular church Facebook group, you're by necessity a part of the larger Facebook ecosystem. And we didn't think that made sense for an RE program. So what we're doing...
I've never heard of Mighty Networks. Is it a free platform for everyone?
It has a free option. We're doing the paid version, which is less than $300 for the entire year. So within a church budget, an RE program budget, it felt really achievable to use this as kind of as our space. And what that gives you is the ability to make a landing page for your community, so you can sign into the community, as well as make a whole bunch of individual groups. So like our elementary age school group has its own Mighty Network sub community where all the parents and kids can be there and chat about what's going on in that program. But it also has some general spaces. So you can have topics, like we're going to have a Dungeons and Dragons topic there. It's not based on any particular age, but anybody who's in the community that wants to talk about that, show up there. We're going to have an art club. We're going to talk about baking. We're going to talk about all sorts of things. And you can also put up challenges, like do a walkabout in your neighborhood or in your backyard and take a picture of something that brings you joy, right? Those sorts of things. So again, it's this opportunity to go deep within our community within BuxMont and our families, and we can make spaces just for BuxMont families. But again, the thing that we can do that we couldn't do before is get to know the teens, the kids, and the adults that are part of the Corvallis congregation, the Kingston congregation, the Fairhaven congregation, you know, that sort of stuff. And again, we don't need to be the lead on every program. You know, my congregation is really focusing on the junior high program. We're going to do a version of Neighboring Faiths through the Soul Matters curriculum that's called Crossing Paths. That's, again, online. But the Kingston congregation is taking the lead on the pre-K program, the preschoolers, and other congregations are leading on different areas. So again, we could really also go towards people's strengths. So, you know, different DREs and different communities and their ministers had different things that they were very into providing and were not as into doing some of the other age-based programs. So this way, do the thing you love. If you really love leading coming of age, lead coming of age this year and do it really well with excitement, and let a congregation that really wants to do stuff with preschoolers and their parents do that. So it's, again, how do we build something that wouldn't have made sense? We wouldn't have partnered with these 3 congregations in a normal time when we were trying to do stuff all live on Sunday morning. It just wouldn't have worked. Right. So again, we're going to see how it goes. We don't know. We're kind of kicking off, like many congregations are reprogramming this coming Sunday, and we'll see. So in a minute, I'll share in the chat the website that we've kind of built, but so you can see what programming is being offered at all the different levels. But, you know, we're going to see. And the thing that my colleague Monica Jacobson-Tennyson, who's at the Kingston congregation, and I have talked a lot about this, is we're building enough structure to have something to show up for, but also have it be flexible enough that if something doesn't work, we let go of that and we change it, or we do something different, you know.
Yeah,
as we go throughout the year.
Yeah, the same spirit of experimentation that we've all been working with for these past 6 months makes sense.
Yeah,
that's really fascinating. And I know that you've mentioned this to me before, but I didn't know all the ins and outs of it. Especially the online platform that sounds like it's going to make so much of it possible is really cool to hear about. Do you know of any other? Are there other UU congregations doing something like this, or as far as you know, are you 4 the only ones doing it?
I don't know of what other kind of collaborations people are building this year, just because every sort of congregation is building their own thing and partnering with different folks. So I've not heard of anything quite like this yet, but it's also might just be that I don't know about it. So
yeah.
So I just shared the link to the website, and I ask that you don't register for the program unless you're a part of the 4 congregations, because we've specifically focused on it being this kind of bubble, kind of like so many other families and communities are having to do, just because it got more and more complex. Every person, every community you add to it. And we thought 4 for the pre-K through grade 12 was the level of complexity we could hold. You know, but I'm happy to answer questions if folks have it after this, or they check it out and they look me up on Facebook or my website, my congregation's website, which is BuxMont, uu.org, and I'll share that in a moment too. You can reach out to me there. My email's there. But the idea is really, how can we build something that helps all 4 congregations and meets the needs that we think are there at this point, and again is flexible enough that we can change as we go. The other piece of all of this is for adults. We've not forgotten that adults are part of our community and need to do religious education and spiritual deepening work for themselves as well. And what we're doing there is we're building a program called UU University. And what the idea here is each congregation that's a part of it, their minister or somebody in their congregation offers a course to the group, and anybody can register for that from the congregations that have signed up. And then
Those same
beyond
4 congregations?
It's the same 4 plus 1. All Souls Kansas City is the 5th. And right now we're starting with just those 5. But this is the sort of program that might lend itself to expanding in a bigger way, because the difference is, because it's adults all on that community, we don't need to background check everybody that's there. They're affiliated with a congregation, and that provides, I think, enough transparency that there's no one's anonymous in this community. We know that, oh, Lee showed up. She's a member of X congregation. Okay, great. Or their minister or their person that's staffing that program knows who they are, and they've registered and said, I'm affiliated with BuxMont UU. So then we know they are a part of some congregational system. And that way, again, there's some responsibility there that often, unfortunately, isn't present in online spaces, where if you say something, you need to own it as who you are and stand behind those words, and hopefully be there in a way that is kind and in line with our values as UU communities. So we're the kind of way we're doing a lot of this work is almost like barter or co-op system. So we're not exchanging a lot of money between these congregations. There's some startup costs and stuff like that that we're sharing, like for the platforms and for the websites and stuff like that. But most of it is, I would have wanted to offer a religious education opportunity for the adults in my community anyway during this time. Most of the work is done to think about how to do that in an online way. So you can cap it at 15 people or whatever, but if those 15 people aren't all from BuxMont, that doesn't lose me anything. And in fact, it actually, I think, enriches the conversation. If we're talking about UU history, which is the course I'm going to offer, I often talk about how does BuxMont's history play out, and at what point did BuxMont arrive on the scene, and what was going on in the broader Unitarian Universalist and Unitarian Universalist movements at that moment. But if we have a congregation in Massachusetts that's been around for 400 years, 200 years, that really changes the conversation quite a bit, where we can talk about, yeah, this congregation started here, or a congregation in the Midwest that came about 100 years later, but before BuxMont. You can bring in some more stories in a way that I think is better than if it's just folks from one congregation.
Plus, there's then the personal connection of the people in the room, to be able
Exactly.
to do that same thing that you are able to do when you talk about where BuxMont fits into the history. Then there's somebody else in the room who's having that same experience when you're talking even about 175 years ago. Like, oh wow,
Right.
that was my congregation. Those
Right.
people were here so that I could be here. And they kept this community going so that it could still be here for me and my family. So that's
Yep.
really wonderful.
And similarly, we're going to have a separate Mighty Network for the adult community, so that, again, it's kind of a walled garden between the two. If you're a kid, a youth, or an adult that's associated with the RE programs, you're in the children and youth space, and or you can be in the adult space, which we don't need to do quite the same level of background checks and stuff like that. Again, we'll have names with everybody. We'll know who's who in there. But again, it can be a space where we're learning together, but we're also getting to know one another. There can be a space that's kind of like a coffee hour in this space, and you can chat with folks that are across the country or in another state and hear about what their congregations are doing, day by day, week by week, and hopefully build some relationships that go beyond taking a class together, which again is, I think, for me, the primary purpose of all of this year is to build resilience, build community, get to know one another, have ways to reach out to other UUs, other people that share our values. As the election comes, no matter what happens in November, it's going to be hard. And what comes next is going to be unknown. So knowing that if you're in a particularly more conservative or more liberal space, that's not the same experience that everyone's having. And to be able to know that and to be reminded of that, hopefully in a way that is different than the sort of conversations that are happening in online spaces, and hopefully that are maybe done with a little bit more care and respect than what we sometimes see in our political discourse. Again, the goal here is not to create a space to have political debates. It's a space to build community, but we know that what really comes up for people in their day-to-day, week-to-week lives is going to come up in these spaces too. Because while we're talking about UU history or poetry or writing as a spiritual practice, we're also going to be talking about who we are and what's going on in our lives, what's going on with our kids in their version of learning in school, what's going on with ourselves and work, whether that be in person, hybrid, or completely online, all of that stuff, what's going on locally with particular protests happening and stuff like that. That's all going to be there no matter what we're talking about. And my hope is that by having people beyond our particular congregational bubble there, we'll know more about the diversity of experiences that are going on, even for UUs in different contexts.
Absolutely. There's so many cool silver linings that you all have found to adapting to what we're going through right now. That's tremendous. I'm looking at the clock also and realizing it's almost 12:30. So anybody who's watching, anybody who's with us this morning, if you have questions for Kevin, you can type them into the comments. We'll see them come up, and I'll read them out loud and we'll answer them. Questions about anything that Kevin has talked about in terms of the experiments and the programs that his congregation, BuxMont UU, is up to, or just any questions for Kevin in general about his congregation, his ministry, you know, things that he's talked about in this hour. Questions about how other UU communities are dealing with all this. Oh, Paula says, what is a fire? That was the Paula, right, Kevin, for the program?
I'm also just sharing my congregation's website, just because that way, if you want to reach out later, it's fine. It's easy to find my email on there. I'm not on Facebook all the time. I'm trying to limit my Facebook time. Yeah. So, but a fire, again, that is our pre-K through grade 12 collaborative religious education program, and it stands for Alliance for Inspiring Religious Education, a fire. So again, thinking about what are the common symbols of our tradition, the flaming chalice, how can we kind of riff on that and have it feel very much like a UU sort of thing. Yeah. So that's how we came up with that.
The 4 congregations that are part of that collaboration, Kevin, do all of them have professional religious education staff, or are some of them working with lay religious educators only?
All of them have some professional religious education staff, and part of why I started this conversation and why others kind of were having this conversation is, as we were looking ahead to this year, my congregation was going through a transition with our director of religious education position, and we didn't know what staff we would have, so that was part of it. So we have our RE committee, which is made up of lay members, and they're really involved in getting this program going and stuff like that too. But so we have for this year an RE coordinator that we've hired for the year. So it's just a different role. The Corvallis congregation has an interim DRE there as well, so they're going through some transitions. The Fairhaven congregation, I believe, has an RE coordinator, and the Kingston congregation has a director of religious education. So each of them have some professional staff that are focused on RE, as have all the ministers been focused on this program, and then some differing structures, but all of them have some lay leaders involved in different pieces of it too.
So it sounds like everybody has professional staff, but maybe different levels and different hours.
Yeah, and different amounts of hours. Not all of them are full-time. Some of them are half-time. Some of them are less, that sort of thing. So, and that was part of this too, of how do you reinvent an entire program as we go into the fall. And none of us felt like it would have been as robust if we had just had to do it on our own, and felt overwhelming to all of us, regardless of kind of our level of staffing in our programs to do it.
Yeah. So Sharon Bader is on our board at WellSprings, Kevin. She just asked, I don't know if you can see it, how similar would you describe these congregations and their core values? Sharon, do you mean WellSprings and BuxMont, or do you mean the 4 congregations that Kevin is talking about? Because that's we could probably answer both of those questions, honestly. And then she says, Lee, do you know of congregations that are similar to WellSprings? Yeah, Sharon, it's interesting. Other people have asked me that question. Earlier this year, Reverend Ken and I at WellSprings did ask me anything about Unitarian Universalism, like Zoom call, and someone asked, the 4, okay. Someone asked that same question, Sharon, of kind of what congregations are most similar to WellSprings in terms of our culture. And it's always been a hard question for me to answer, because we are a recent experiment in Unitarian Universalism, and so much of the intention behind our experiment was to create something that was different and kind of new and different within Unitarian Universalism. So, I know of a lot of congregations that have now built more contemporary music into their worship. That's a big thing that has happened in the last 15, 20 years. I know of a lot of congregations that have a band, but I don't know of any, I don't think, that only have a band. Usually it's part of kind of a more mixed music program that also includes a choir, that also includes more traditional music. Contemporary worship, same kind of thing. I think there are some congregations, especially in the West Coast and the Southwest, I get the impression, that are more casual, that are more informal in kind of how they gather and how they do their liturgy on Sunday morning, how they go through the steps of kind of what a service includes. But the only congregations I can think of that are that have been more similar to WellSprings are kind of new experiments that have started since WellSprings. And unfortunately, a lot of those didn't start with the same kind of institutional support that WellSprings is fortunate to have, and a lot of them don't exist anymore. There was an experiment in Brooklyn that maybe Kevin was familiar with called Original Blessing. There was,
which ultimately it's still in existence, and it actually meets in First Unitarian space. When I was there as an intern, towards the end, we had been starting to partner with them, and they were meeting once a month in the building there. So they're kind of a partner to that congregation.
Yeah, some of those have found sustainability by partnering with existing congregations, or part of their model is to be sustainable is that they don't actually meet every week. They might meet once every other week or once a month. The Sanctuary in Boston is another one that I think meets maybe twice a month. And they have a relationship with the First Unitarian Church in Boston, which is an old historic congregation. So we are a little bit of a black sheep, but in a good way. I think in Unitarian
I think I saw Sharon post that she was asking about the four and a fire, and I'll say that we're pretty different congregations. Some stereotypical ways to break us down is, I would say, the Corvallis, Oregon congregation and BuxMont here in Pennsylvania. We both kind of come out of the fellowship model and have that in our history, which is, again, a lot more lay leadership centered, and both of the congregations have settled professional full-time ministries as well. But again, I can't speak for the Corvallis congregation, but I believe they didn't start with professional ministry. And I know BuxMont did, but then had this long period of time where it was completely lay-led. So we have that in our background. And the Fairhaven, Massachusetts and Kingston, Massachusetts are much older congregations, and a lot more, because of that, a lot more historically centered around professional ministry, have, older buildings, have programs and cultures that are much more New England and much more, I would say, based in the historic Unitarian and Universalist traditions, rather than the, I would say, later additions, which Corvallis being on the West Coast by nature of how America was settled and or taken over, but how America developed was a later congregation, and BuxMont by just the nature of it being started in the 60s, doesn't have the same historic pieces that those other two congregations do. So I'd say in those ways we're different. Obviously, in terms of having professional staff that are wanting to experiment in big ways, we're similar, right? That's why these four congregational systems signed up for this experiment, right? So there's some pieces around that are similar, but again, I would say we don't have the same programs before the pandemic. We had very different models. I think of what we did on Sunday mornings were different, and what sort of classes we offered to our kids, our children and youth were different. There are overlaps. We've all in the past offered things like Our Whole Lives. We're not offering that this year just because of the nature of it being online. But we've all offered things like Coming of Age and things like Neighboring Faiths in the past. So we're continuing some of that. But a lot of this is adapting and or creating programming that isn't the same as what was here at any of our congregations 6 months ago, a year ago. So again, there's some broad strokes that I would say there's some similarities and some differences, but again, our congregations due in large part to design are congregational in nature. So we have a long history, which sometimes benefits us and sometimes challenges us, of making it our own way at each individual congregation too. And that's part of what I hope we take away from this time, is we don't have to do it all on our own. Again, when we start gathering in person, some of what's possible will change, but I hope that we continue to be more of what we strive to be as an association of congregations, and be more associative than we sometimes have been in the past, rather than more individualistic, which is a thing that we wrestle with in our congregations too, right? Having people wanting to be very much themselves as individuals, but also being a part of covenant and community, right? It's that same tension at the institutional level, is we want each of our congregations to do its own thing and have the freedom to make choices, and know that there's some loss there when we don't build things together and when we don't create things together.
What we're wrestling with as a whole country right now, I think.
Yes.
But the tension between individual choice and freedom and things that are good for the whole, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks for your question, Sharon. And it's almost 12:40 now, so I want to let Kevin go because I know you have a whole rest of your day to go forward to, and I have a staff meeting at 1:30, so I should probably eat lunch.
Yep,
Kevin,
same here. It's about lunchtime.
Is there anything else you didn't get to talk about that you wanted to share?
I don't think so. The one thing I think I would share is that no matter where you are in the country, no matter what congregations you're affiliated with or not, know that you're not alone in this, right? We're all making this up as we go in some ways, and there's no perfect or right answer. So the answers that we're developing at BuxMont, some of those I hope are helpful to other people, but no, just because you're not a part of a 4-congregation collaborative for your RE, that doesn't mean that that's the right answer for your congregation or for your community or for your family, frankly. So it's all, the thing that I think I'm trying to say a lot here to my folks and to folks that are part of this collaboration with us is you're not being graded on whether you're being the right the right parent, the right person right now. Try to hold the fact that we're all doing the best we can. And that's part of also what I'm leaning into with all these collaborations is they are doing the best that we can right now with what we know, and they will by necessity change and grow and transform. And what we think is going to work in mid-September, we know 2 months from now will be a very different answer. And I think that's true for all of us, whether we are ministers, whether we are professional staff, or whether we are members of congregations, or just families trying to figure out what does it mean to center values during this time, is that we are all doing the best we can, and that is enough to be trying to do the best we can.
Yeah. Absolutely. We all need a lot more grace right now for ourselves and for each other. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Kevin.
Great. Well, great to be with you, Lee. Great to be with all the folks that are on live with us now and those that may watch this in the future.
Same. I think I saw your husband coming home with all those groceries too, so you better get going and help him.
Exactly. Next steps.
Yeah.
All right.
Do the next right thing, always.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks, Kevin. It's good to see you.
Yes, very good to be with you.
Today. I'll talk to you soon.
Yep.
All right. And bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.